I stood frozen at the edge of the aisle, a single white rose trembling in my hand as the violins played over vows I wasn't allowed to hear. "Get that woman out of here," my daughter-in-law ordered, her finger like a knife. Security moved toward me, but it was my own son's silence that struck hardest. After rocking him through colic, after paying for his schooling, after showing up for every milestone, I was no longer his mother. I was that woman. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor, subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The sun hit the vineyard in soft gold, bathing the white chairs and blush roses in a dreamlike haze. Music drifted from the quartet beneath the pergola, violins in C major, too sweet, almost mocking. Joan stood at the edge of the lawn in a lilac-sheath dress that clung modestly to her frame. She'd curled her hair that morning, just as Layla liked it when she was little. Her fingers, trembling slightly, cradled a single white rose. No card, no ribbon, just a rose, like the ones she used to tuck behind Layla's ear after ballet recitals. The first person to notice her wasn't Layla, it was Melanie. Melanie's eyes snapped toward the edge of the crowd as if she'd sensed a draft of cold air. Her smile faltered. Her heel clicked once on the stone pathway as she stepped forward, her hand already lifting, manicured fingers slicing through the air like a blade. "You weren't invited." Her voice was low, but the sharpness cut through the music like a snapped string. Joan didn't flinch. Her grip on the rose held steady, but her voice came quieter than she meant it to. "I'm not here to cause a scene." Melanie took 2 more steps until they stood almost toe-to-toe, a practiced smile returning to her lips. "This is Layla's day. You showing up? That's a scene." Behind them, the guests began to murmur. Rows of heads turned. Phones dipped slightly in hands. "Security," Melanie snapped, waving a hand toward the valet tent. "Get that woman out of here." That woman. Joan's heart kicked hard against her ribs, but she didn't move. Her eyes shifted, scanning the guests until she found him, Darren, standing beside the groomsmen in a tailored navy suit, rigid as stone. She locked eyes with her son, her baby boy, the same boy who once cried when she missed his 8th grade spelling bee. Now a man in pressed lapels, jaw clenched, gaze blank. He said nothing, not a word, not a nod. Just looked through her like stained glass. Joan's mouth parted slightly. "Darren." "Ma'am," said the security guard, approaching from her left, tall, mid-40s, professional but clearly uncomfortable. "We're going to need you to step away from the event." The rose slipped a half-inch in her hand. "I'm her mother," Joan whispered. But no one looked at her now except the guard and 2 teenage girls in dusty pink bridesmaid dresses, whispering behind folded hands. "I understand, ma'am," the guard said gently, already reaching for her elbow. "No, you don't," her voice cracked. "I bought her first pair of shoes. I taught her how to tie her hair in a ponytail. Ma'am. She called me when she got her period. She sobbed, and I held her and—" "Ma'am." Joan turned to Melanie again, searching for softness, a glimmer, anything. But Melanie just smoothed her dress and said, "You had your chance, Joan." Then, calmly, coldly, she turned her back and walked away, back to the altar where Layla was laughing at something the officiant said, unaware or pretending not to be. The guard took Joan's arm. This time, she let him. As they began to walk, the murmurs grew. Some faces turned away. Others watched, fully invested. Joan held her head high, but her feet felt miles apart. Each step sank. Her breath tightened. And then it happened. The rose slipped. It rolled from her fingers, hitting the gravel with a soft sound no one heard but her. A white petal tore off, crushed beneath a waiter's heel. She didn't reach for it. She kept walking, out of the frame, out of the story. At the edge of the lot, where the grass met pavement, she turned once more. Darren was still watching her. Still, silent, his hands folded, eyes unreadable, and then he looked away. Joan exhaled, slow and ragged. She climbed into the back seat of the waiting Uber she'd called from the parking lot earlier, just in case. The driver said nothing, sensing the gravity without needing details. As they pulled onto the road, Joan reached into her clutch and took out the envelope she never got to deliver. Inside was the letter, 3 pages, handwritten, the ink slightly smudged at the corners. She stared at it. Then she tore it clean down the middle, and again. And again. Shreds of apology and memory scattered across the seat like confetti no one would cheer for. Then her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She stared. Buzz. Buzz. She let it ring once more, then answered. Joan? A male voice. Breathless. Urgent. Her spine straightened. She didn't recognize it. Not at first. It's about Darren, the voice said. He's not who you think he is. Joan sat at the edge of her bed, legal pad balanced on her lap, pen moving without pause. The pages had stopped shaking in her hands hours ago. Now, each stroke came steady, sharp, and deliberate. Camp tuition, 2008, $3,200 sat prep for Darren. $150 Layla's prom dress, altered twice. $680 bridal shower catering deposit. $200 florist down payment. Yes, for that wedding, $2,000. Each line felt like pulling out a nail someone else had hammered into her skin. The house was quiet except for the soft click of the grandfather clock in the hall. Afternoon light filtered in through the blinds, slicing the room into golden shadow. On the dresser, a faded photo of a 10-year-old Layla grinning with missing front teeth grinned back at her from a seashell frame. Joan didn't look at it. The doorbell rang. She didn't ask who it was, just opened the door. Clara stood there in ripped jeans, her strawberry blonde hair tucked under a worn Yankees cap. A legal messenger bag hung from one shoulder, and her mouth twitched into a knowing half-smile. You ready? Joan nodded once and stepped aside. They didn't waste time with tea or pleasantries. Clara pulled a chair beside the bed, flipping open her laptop while Joan reached for the file boxes stacked beside the armoire. They began sorting, photos, receipts, old birthday cards with dollar bills still folded inside. Look at this, Clara muttered, holding up a Polaroid. You wrapped her a whole swing set. Christmas 2002? Joan gave a tight smile. She screamed when she saw it, ran outside in her pajamas. Clara held her gaze. You built half their childhood. I paid for the other half, Joan said evenly. They kept going, check stubs, tuition forms. A handwritten note from Layla. Thanks for always being there, even when Dad wasn't. I love you forever. L. Jones set that one aside, just for a second, then slid it beneath the others. When the sorting ended, Joan finally spoke. If I wasn't family at her wedding, I'm not family in my will. Clara arched a brow. You sure? Dead sure. Joan's voice didn't waver. She made her choice. So did Darren. I raised 2 people who watched me get thrown out like trash and did nothing. My money won't be the reward for their silence. Clara tapped a few keys. Then let's start editing the legacy. Joan stood and crossed to the window. Outside, the neighborhood kids rode scooters down the sidewalk. It felt like a different planet. She picked up her phone and scrolled to a number she hadn't dialed in months. Evan Myers, Estate Law. A voice answered smoothly after 2 rings. Evan, Joan said. It's Joan Wallace. I want a full audit of my estate. Every asset, every clause. I'm redoing everything. He paused. Is something wrong? Nothing that can't be fixed. Behind her, Clara began labeling files. Revoke, reassign, donate. Joan paced. The accounts, the land, the trust for Layla, I want it frozen, indefinitely. She doesn't get to forget me at her wedding and remember me when I'm gone. Understood, Evan said. I'll assemble a team. Make it quick. She hung up without goodbye. Clara looked up from her screen. Want to talk about what happened? No, Joan said. Clara waited anyway. Finally, Joan said. She looked so happy, like none of it hurt her. Maybe it didn't. Joan didn't respond. Instead, She grabbed a red marker from Clara's case and crossed out a printed line on the draft will. Beneficiary, Layla Wallace. Clara's brows lifted. Who's it going to now? Joan didn't answer. But she walked to the bookcase and pulled out a small wooden box. Inside was a photo of her late sister's daughter, Eliza, a nurse in Colorado, working 2 jobs to pay off student loans. They hadn't spoken in years, but Eliza had sent a Christmas card every year without fail, handwritten, no matter what. Joan ran her thumb over the photo. I think it's time I put my name where it matters, she said softly. Clara tilted her head. You're rewriting more than a will, Joan. Joan looked back at her, eyes glassy but fierce. No, I'm cutting out rot. Outside, wind picked up. Leaves skittered across the driveway like whispers. Clara reached into her bag. Then let's sharpen the blade. Just as Joan sat down again, her phone vibrated across the table. Another unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. Joan Wallace, a woman asked. Yes? I don't know how to say this. I'm Darren's ex, and you need to know what he did in Houston. Joan froze. What did he do? Evan Myers arrived 20 minutes early. He stood in Joan's foyer in a dark gray overcoat. His usual tailored calm slightly frayed. He hadn't bothered with coffee or his signature silk tie. Just a leather briefcase and eyes that looked like they hadn't rested since Saturday. I saw the video, he said, voice low. Joan stiffened. There's a video? He nodded once. Someone posted it to Instagram. It was already down by the time I checked again, but I watched it. Joan stepped aside and let him in. Clara was already at the dining table, laptop open, flanked by folders marked in red and green tabs. Evan sat slowly, opened his case, then looked up at Joan. It wasn't a mistake, he said. It wasn't a last-minute mix-up or a seating oversight. You were deliberately erased. Joan lowered herself into the chair opposite him. My son watched it happen. Didn't blink. Silence settled like dust. Evan reached into his case and pulled out the trust binder. If you're ready, we'll start with the primary revision. She gave a single nod. Effective immediately, Evan said, flipping pages. You're removing Darren Wallace and Melanie Bright from the beneficiary clauses of both your revocable and irrevocable trusts. That includes land, liquid assets, and joint holdings. Clara didn't look up from her notes, but smirked. Poetic. She mic'd up her vows like it was Broadway, and still, your silence was louder. Joan pressed her lips together to keep from crying. Her hands trembled slightly, but she kept them flat on the table. No legacy for people who turn their backs on mine, she said. No access. No names on any of it. Evan adjusted his glasses and slid over a pen. You'll initial here, and here. Joan signed with the decisiveness of someone breaking chains. Next step, he continued, is drafting updated directives, healthcare proxies, guardianship wishes, end-of-life decisions. If you're incapacitated, we'll need someone you trust. She didn't hesitate. Not them. Clara, Evan asked. Clara blinked. Me? Joan nodded. You've known me 20 years. You tell bad jokes and show up when it counts. That's more family than I've had in months. Clara covered her hand briefly. You're damn right I'll pull the plug if needed. Joan gave a half laugh, wiped at her cheek quickly. Outside, a gust rattled the bare tree branches against the windows. Inside, the mood shifted, still grave, but anchored. No longer mourning, now planning. Evan leaned in. Do you want to create a statement of intent? Joan furrowed her brow. Meaning? If this gets contested later, we can file a letter with the court explaining your reasoning. Layla might not like it. Darren could try to challenge it. You don't owe them anything, but your clarity could protect your wishes. Joan stared past them, toward the china cabinet she hadn't opened since last Christmas. Inside, porcelain angels gathered dust beside crystal that no one used. She looked back at Evan. Let them try. She signed again. He slid the papers back into the binder with practiced efficiency. You've got 3 options now. Funds go to charity, to Eliza, or to a trust for causes you personally designate. Start with Eliza. She answers my cards. That's more than Darren's done in a year. Evan nodded, made a note. Clara reached into her messenger bag and pulled out a new folder, yellow this time. This is a legacy plan draft. Everything from funeral details to letters to be read aloud if you want. You said something the other day about rot. This part's the root system. Joan flipped it open. A blank space stared back. Her future, unwritten. I want it clean, she said. No speeches from people who couldn't even say hello at a wedding. No flowers from strangers who suddenly remember I existed. Clara grinned. So, closed list, funeral edition? Exactly. They all sat still for a moment, the enormity of Joan's choice slowly settling around them like snowfall. Then Joan's phone buzzed on the table again. A message this time. Unknown number. I have pictures. Of Darren. You need to see what he did. Joan picked it up. 3 photos loaded. And in the first one, Darren was gripping a woman's wrist in a hallway, face twisted into something feral. The timestamp read, Houston, March 3rd. Her hand flew to her mouth. Clara leaned over, frowning. Joan, what is it? Joan didn't answer, but her silence said everything. It started with a grainy 32-second clip uploaded by someone named Mag's Mom TX. A stranger, maybe a cousin of the groom, maybe just someone who couldn't shake what she'd seen that day. The caption read, This woman was kicked out of her granddaughter's wedding. Found out later she paid for the florist. Watch the sun. The video opened mid-argument. Melanie's voice could barely be heard over the quartet music, but the body language said everything. Her outstretched arm, finger jabbing toward the valet tent, Joan standing still with a white rose in hand. The rose dropped just seconds before the camera cut off. The comments came fast. This is heartbreaking. That poor woman. Look how calm she is. Is that her son just standing there? Wait. She paid for the florist? This is elder cruelty, full stop. By the next morning, the video had made its way into a dozen private Facebook groups across 3 counties, Tri-County Families United, women supporting women 50 plus, brides behaving badly. Each one resharing it with captions like, What would you do if this was your mother? Or, Disrespect has no season, not even wedding season. Joan didn't find the video on her own. Clara showed her. She was in the kitchen, slicing pears for breakfast, when Clara burst in, phone shaking in her hand. You're trending, she said breathlessly. Joan looked up, amused, but tired. That doesn't sound like a compliment. Clara turned the screen to face her. No, I mean trending. As in viral, like Justice for Joan, viral. Joan wiped her hands on a dish towel and watched the clip in silence. It was surreal, her own face, frozen in profile, the rose slipping from her fingers, Darren's eyes fixed on nothing. She didn't speak until the screen faded to black. I didn't know someone filmed it. Neither did they, Clara said, nodding toward the growing view count. They sure as hell didn't expect this. Melanie's social media went dark within hours. First, the comments disappeared. Then her profile photo, then her Instagram, gone entirely. A LinkedIn post congratulating Layla on her perfect vineyard wedding was quietly deleted. But the internet didn't forget. One post, shared by a teacher in Fort Worth, read, My mom helped raise my daughter. If I ever treated her like this, she'd haunt me alive. We have to stop pretending weddings excuse cruelty. Another added, She paid for the damn flowers. Flowers she wasn't allowed to smell. I can't. Joan kept reading, her thumbs scrolling slowly, like she was trying to feel each word. Then her phone buzzed. A new text, unknown number, but she didn't need to guess. The preview line read, Layla, I'm sorry, I didn't know. Joan didn't tap it, didn't open the thread. Just stared at the words until they blurred, unread and untouched. She reached out, Joan said quietly, placing the phone face down on the counter. Clara raised an eyebrow. And? I don't believe her, Joan replied. You don't not know when your mother's being marched out in front of you. Clara nodded. She saw what she wanted to see. Joan crossed to the window. Outside, the wind had shifted again. Cooler now, like fall had finally arrived for good. Across the street, a boy raced past on a scooter, the wind lifting his jacket behind him like wings. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel invisible. Behind her, Clara's phone dinged again. She glanced at the screen and smiled. Someone just started a GoFundMe, she said. Title: Give Joan the wedding she deserved. It's mostly jokes and spite donations, but you've got fans. Joan chuckled, but her eyes never left the window. I don't want a wedding, she said. I want a reckoning. Clara leaned against the counter, arms folded. Then maybe it's time you show them what happens when a woman stops begging to be seen. Joan didn't reply, but inside her chest, something old and quiet stirred. Not bitterness, not vengeance. Clarity. And then another buzz. This time, a name attached. Darren. Joan didn't move. The message preview hung on the screen like a dare. We need to talk. It wasn't what it looked like. 3 days after the video went viral, Evan showed up with a folder thick enough to slap with. He didn't ring the bell. Clara opened the door before he could knock, waving him in with a half-full coffee mug and a knowing look. You're early, she said. He shrugged. Been waiting for this conversation since 2019. Joan was already at the table, in her robe, glasses perched low on her nose, skimming old family financial records Evan had emailed the night before. She didn't look up. Tell me I still own what I think I own. Evan placed the folder in front of her. You do. 49% of the Wallace family home. The deed still lists you as co-owner. Joan looked up slowly. Melanie never bought me out. She talked like she did, Evan said, pulling up the digital copy on his tablet. But the paperwork was never filed. The quitclaim deed was drafted, but never signed. That house was refinanced under Darren's name, but they never cleared the equity stake. You're still on title, legally and publicly. Clara let out a low whistle. So let me get this straight. These people iced you out, embarrassed you in front of 200 guests, deleted you from their lives, and forgot you still own the damn driveway. Evan gave a small smile. And the garage. And 1.5 bathrooms. Joan leaned back in her chair, processing. She didn't feel triumphant. Not yet, but something shifted. They were so sure, she said quietly. They painted the walls, replaced the mailbox, threw out my porch chairs like I was already dead. Clara sat down beside her. Time to evict more than feelings. Evan slid over a new document. This is the dissolution form. It ends joint ownership and triggers a forced partition unless one party buys the other out, which they won't be able to do unless Melanie liquidates assets. Joan picked up the pen. Her hand hovered. This house, she began, but stopped herself. She could still smell it in her memories, the cedar floor polish, the coffee Darren spilled on the upstairs carpet when he was 10. Layla's fingerprints on the hallway mirror. The place wasn't just a house, it was a lifetime. Then again, they'd already burned the photographs. Joan signed. Clara reached over and underlined her signature with a dramatic flourish. That's what I call a closing act. Evan tapped a few keys on his tablet. I've already filed a quiet title action in county court. It'll go uncontested, but Melanie and Darren will still be served. And when they see it, Joan asked, they'll realize they built their lives on a foundation that still legally has your name on it. Joan nodded once, firm. Let them feel it, she said. Evan packed up slowly. I'll courier the notice. They'll get it before week's end. He was almost to the door when Clara's phone buzzed. She glanced down. You're going to want to hear this. Joan raised an eyebrow. Clara handed her the phone. Your favorite wedding videographer just posted something. Melanie filed a copyright takedown request on the viral clip. Joan laughed. A full laugh this time. She's trying to sue the internet now. No, Clara said, grinning. She's trying to bury a truth she doesn't own. Outside, the late afternoon sun cut sharp shadows across the sidewalk. It was that specific autumn light, clear, unforgiving, with nothing soft left in it. Joan stood at the window again. "She'll scream when she reads that letter," she said. Clara nodded. "Let her." Just then, the mail slot snapped. Clara walked over, pulled a single manila envelope from the floor. "No return address," she murmured. Joan took it and sliced it open with a letter opener. Inside, a printed photo. It was the second image from the Houston series. Darren in a parking garage, standing toe-to-toe with a woman in scrubs, her face red, her hands raised defensively. Scrawled in ink at the bottom, "Ask him who paid for silence last time." Joan blinked. Her mouth set in a straight line. Clara stepped forward. "Joan?" Joan didn't answer, but she picked up the photo, walked to the shredder, and didn't drop it in. He showed up in a Tesla he couldn't afford without her name on the paperwork. Darren parked across the street, waited 5 full minutes before getting out. He smoothed down the front of his jacket like it could erase everything already unraveling beneath it. Joan was sitting on the porch when he approached, a mug of coffee in her hand, lukewarm. Clara had gone inside moments earlier, leaving the door slightly ajar. The breeze pushed it gently back and forth, like even the house wasn't sure it wanted him there. Darren cleared his throat. "I've been calling." "I saw," Joan said, eyes fixed on the neighborhood beyond him. "I sent a message. I left it unread." He shifted from foot to foot, hands in his pockets. "I just wanted to say, at the wedding, I wasn't trying to hurt you." Joan's gaze didn't waver. "You succeeded anyway. It was Layla's day. I didn't want to make a scene." Joan finally looked at him, not with rage, not even contempt, just the quiet disappointment that stings more than either. "You chose embarrassment over backbone." Darren's jaw twitched. "I didn't know what to say." "You didn't say anything," she said. "That's the point." She stood slowly, setting the coffee mug down on the porch rail. "I stood there," she continued, voice calm but steely, "in front of your friends, your in-laws, people I used to call family, and you let me be dragged away like some uninvited stranger. Not a word, not a flinch. You didn't even blink. It wasn't that simple. It never is when guilt's involved." He looked at her, eyes shining now. "Mom, please, just don't go through with this. The house, the filings, the public stuff. It's gotten out of hand." She tilted her head. "Out of hand?" He nodded quickly. "Layla's upset. Melanie can't sleep. This isn't helping anyone." Joan took a step toward him. "No," she said, her voice sharpening. "What's not helping anyone is decades of silence, of swallowing grief so nobody else had to feel guilty, of showing up when no one else did, and being erased anyway. Can't we just stop?" she said, cutting him off. "Of course you want to stop now. You're finally uncomfortable." The door creaked wider. Clara stepped out, arms folded, expression unreadable. "She's not alone this time," she said to Darren. He looked at her, really looked, and something in his expression crumpled. "You don't understand what it's like to be in the middle," he said. Clara gave a short laugh. "I'm not in the middle. I picked a side the minute she got escorted out for showing up with a rose." Joan held up a hand. "Clara, it's fine." "No," Clara said. "It's not." Darren swallowed hard. "You're burning everything down. I'm reclaiming what you all pretended wasn't mine." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Joan took another step toward him, softer now. "Do you remember my birthday last year?" she asked. He didn't answer. "I do," she continued. "I sat alone with a cake I bought myself. You sent a text at 9:42 p.m. It said, 'Sorry, rough day. Love you.' That's all." His eyes fell to the porch floorboards. "And the year before that," she said, "still nothing. I waited until midnight, thinking maybe you'd call. You didn't. You were on a weekend trip to Denver. I saw the photos online." His voice cracked. "I didn't mean—" "But you did," Joan said. "Every time you didn't show up, you meant to. Every silence was a choice. And now I'm choosing to." He stared at her for a long moment, then turned and walked down the porch steps, slower than he came. Clara watched him go. "He'll be back." "I know," Joan said. But he won't come with words next time, Clara added. He'll come with lawyers. Joan exhaled, deep and even. Let them come. The wind lifted again. Leaves skittered across the porch like footsteps retreating into the past. Joan stepped inside, closed the door behind her. On the hallway table, the Houston photo still sat beneath a paperweight. Not forgotten, not yet used, but waiting. It was supposed to be a quiet Friday morning. Instead, Joan found herself in the courtroom 3B, seated behind a polished oak table, under the sharp hum of fluorescence and the sharper stare of Melanie's attorney. Melanie sat beside him in a stiff gray blazer, lips pursed like she'd swallowed something bitter. Darren wasn't there. Neither was Layla. Joan didn't need them. She had Evan on her left and Clara on her right, shoulders squared, paperwork stacked, expressions calm and unshakable. The judge, a woman in her late 50s with reading glasses perched low on her nose, called the room to order. Melanie's lawyer stood first, a man with a practiced half-smile and too much gel in his hair. Your Honor, he began, voice smooth, rehearsed, we're here today because Ms. Wallace, my client's former mother-in-law, has taken aggressive legal steps fueled by confusion, grief, and what we believe is a vendetta rooted in personal family tension. Joan didn't blink. He went on, painting her as a bitter elder clinging to control, a woman twisting emotional history into legal threats. We're asking the court to issue a temporary injunction against the property claim and trust alterations until we can assess her mental fitness and motivations. Joan felt Clara bristle beside her. The judge nodded once, turning to Evan. Mr. Myers? Evan rose slowly, buttoning his jacket with ease. Your Honor, I'd like to enter into evidence a brief timeline of financial transactions, dating back to 1998, when Miss Wallace first contributed to the down payment of the disputed property. We've also included trust disbursement logs, copies of frozen accounts, and he tapped the final page, a link to a publicly circulated video viewed over 4.2 million times, in which Ms. Wallace is physically removed from a wedding she helped fund. No confusion, no grief, just facts. Melanie shifted uncomfortably. Evan stepped back. Then Clara stood. Your Honor, if I may, she said. The judge nodded. I'm submitting a character affidavit, Clara said, handing over a sealed envelope. 23 years as Joan Wallace's friend and legal liaison. I've watched her balance family, career, and compassion through decades of neglect she never made public. Until now. She turned, made eye contact with Melanie. I can assure this court, her only confusion was in believing silence ever bought loyalty. The courtroom went still. Then Evan gestured toward Joan. She's prepared a statement, Your Honor. Joan stood slowly, not rushed, not flustered. She unfolded a single page. Her voice, when it came, was clear as glass. I am not confused. I'm not vindictive. I'm not grieving something I lost. I'm protecting what I built. She looked directly at the judge. I was there when my daughter learned how to walk, when my son had his first panic attack, when their father left. When the power got shut off and I sold my mother's wedding ring to keep the lights on. I was there for every scraped knee, every hospital run, every form, every check, every forgotten holiday. She paused. And when it was time for the wedding, I paid the florist. Quietly, willingly. I didn't ask for credit, just a seat. Her voice didn't waver. They gave that seat to someone else, and when I stood at the edge of the ceremony, holding a white rose, just one, my son looked away. They all looked away, but I didn't. She folded the paper. They taught me I wasn't family. I'm simply responding with the same clarity. Silence. Even the bailiff looked down, like he needed a second to recover. Melanie's lawyer cleared his throat and stood abruptly. We'd like to request a recess to confer with— No, the judge said, firm. She removed her glasses, looked directly at Melanie. Your injunction is denied. The claims against Ms. Wallace are baseless. If anything, it's this court that should be questioning your conduct, Miss Bright. Melanie's face flushed, fast and blotchy. She stood to protest, but her attorney placed a hand on her wrist. Don't, he whispered. The judge banged her gavel. Next case. Joan sat down slowly, a long breath leaving her chest like a weight lifted. Not gone, but named. Clara reached over, squeezed her hand. Evan leaned in. They're going to hate this. Joan nodded. Good. They stood together to leave. As they stepped into the hallway, Evan's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. You might want to see this, he said, turning the phone toward them. On the screen, a new video. A woman crying in a stairwell. The caption read, I was the nurse in Houston, and I'm done being silent. It was a cloudy Sunday when Layla showed up. No cameras, no Darren. Just a knock at the door, tentative, almost guilty. Joan opened it slowly, unsure who she expected. But the moment she saw the face behind the knock, her stomach dropped in a way it hadn't in weeks. There she was, her daughter, new ring on her finger, hair in a tight bun, shoulders hunched like she was bracing for the wind. Can I come in? Layla asked, her voice small. Joan didn't answer right away. She studied her, the way you study something you once loved that now lives behind glass. Eventually, she stepped aside. Layla entered like the air was thick. She paused in the hallway, glancing at the pictures still on the wall. One showed her at age 6, with her head in Joan's lap during a Christmas concert. Another was from prom, Joan pinning a corsage on her wrist. You didn't take these down. I don't rewrite history, Joan said. Just correct it. Layla flinched but followed her into the kitchen. Clara stood at the counter, arms folded, silent as she passed. A witness, a wall, a warning. Layla sat at the table and placed something between them, a folded piece of paper worn at the edges. I came to apologize, she said. And not just for the wedding. Joan said nothing. I froze, Layla continued. I saw you standing there, and I didn't know what to do. I thought if I looked away, maybe no one else would notice. Joan's hands were folded on the table, unmoving. And when I was escorted out, I panicked. Melanie told me you weren't invited, that you didn't RSVP, that you were there to ruin things. Joan's brow lifted. And you believed her. Layla's voice cracked. I'm not proud of it. I don't care if you're proud. I care that you watched it happen. That you let your mother, who paid for your damn florist, get removed from your wedding like an intruder. And now you want me to forget it. Layla looked up, eyes brimming. I didn't know about the florist until after, I swear. She reached for the paper between them and unfolded it. The original invoice. Joan's signature was scrawled at the bottom in thick black ink. The date read, April 4th, 2025. You signed it, Layla whispered. I saw it in the files yesterday. I asked the vendor to show me, and there it was. Your name. You paid for all of it. Joan stared at the page for a long moment, then reached for it. She didn't read it. She just folded it carefully, set it aside, and said, Thank you for confirming what I already knew. Layla swallowed hard. I don't know how to fix this. Joan stood slowly. That's the thing. You're not supposed to fix it. You're supposed to live with it. Like I lived with every forgotten birthday, every broken promise, every time I showed up and left feeling invisible. Mom, you don't get to call me that today. Layla blinked, tears rolling now. Joan walked her to the door, not unkindly, but firmly. At the threshold, Layla turned. I loved you, Joan nodded once. Then you should have acted like it. She closed the door. No slam, no drama. Just a quiet click. The kind of finality that doesn't echo, it settles. She stood there a moment before turning back toward the kitchen. Clara was still there, leaning against the counter. She brought the invoice, Joan said. I saw, Clara replied. That was kind. Joan pulled out a chair, sat slowly. But it wasn't accountability, Clara added. Joan exhaled, long and quiet. No, she said. It was an admission. That's different. They sat in silence for a while, the house still around them. Outside, the clouds broke slightly, a patch of pale blue trying to force its way through. Then Clara's phone buzzed. She glanced down, frowned. "It's Evan," Joan nodded. "Answer." Clara swiped to pick up. "Hey." She paused, eyes narrowing. "Wait, slow down. What do you mean someone called the nursing board?" Joan sat up straighter. Clara put the phone on speaker. Evan's voice came through, clipped and urgent. "Someone sent that Houston video to the state board anonymously. That nurse, the one in the stairwell, she's filed an official report. There's an active complaint. And if what she's saying is true," he trailed off. Joan's mouth went dry. "If it's true, what?" Evan exhaled. "Darren didn't just grab her. There's evidence of coercion, threats, possibly hush money." Clara sat down beside Joan. "What now?" Joan looked toward the folded invoice still sitting on the table. Her signature, her silence, once. Now a weapon. She stood. "Now," she said, voice even, "we stop playing defense." It started, as most frauds do, with arrogance. Evan was the one who found it, buried in the permits filed for the Vineyard wedding. A scanned form from the county's Department of Alcohol Beverage Control, required for events with open bars. Box 12, financial guarantor. Scrawled in ink beside the label was Joan's name, her legal signature. Only it wasn't her handwriting. Evan called within minutes. "She forged you," he said, no greeting. "Twice." Joan stood at her kitchen counter, the cordless pressed to her ear. Sunlight carving long lines across the tile. "Who?" she asked, though she already knew. "Melanie," Evan said. "She signed your name for the alcohol permit and again for the cake invoice." The bakery still had the original form on file. Different pens, same forged signature. Clara looked up from across the table, her mouth flattening. "I checked with the clerk's office," Evan continued. "The event coordinator said Melanie dropped off the forms herself. And here's the kicker. She told the office you were out of town, but covering costs. Witness confirms it." Joan's chest tightened. Not with shock, but with something colder, something measured. "Are we talking criminal? Forgery, fraud, false representation. If you want to file, we can." Joan didn't answer right away. She glanced at the folded florist invoice still on the counter. Her name, real and inked in truth. "I want to file," she said. "Let's go public." By Tuesday, Evan had delivered the criminal complaint to the DA's office. Witness affidavits included. Receipts highlighted. Melanie's signature compared side by side with Joan's on 3 separate documents. By Thursday, 2 investigators visited Melanie's home, and by Friday morning, the whispers had spread like smoke through the community. "Did you hear? Joan Wallace is pressing charges. Apparently Melanie forged her name. Twice. Didn't Joan pay for the whole damn florist, too? That family's a mess. Always seemed perfect, huh?" Clara read the gossip aloud from the local Facebook group. One eyebrow cocked. One woman said she used to be in a book club with Melanie, called her a snake in silk pumps. Joan didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She just sat at her kitchen table and typed out a statement. It wasn't long. Just 3 sentences. Family is earned, not claimed. Silence is not forgiveness. I never stopped showing up. They just stopped seeing me. She posted it with a black and white photo from 15 years ago. Layla, Darren, and Joan standing on a pier. Wind in their hair, summer light softening their eyes. No caption, just the statement. By noon, it had over 1,000 shares. That afternoon, the Westbrook Record, a local paper that had once profiled Melanie for her generous volunteer work, ran a new headline. Matriarch fights back after public disownment. Family is earned. They used the photo Joan posted. A clean column, no salacious details. Just the timeline, the wedding, the viral video, the courtroom win, and now the fraud. Melanie's response, silence. Her socials stayed scrubbed. Her LinkedIn deactivated. The PTA page removed her from the board. A neighbor snapped a picture of her pulling into her driveway, sunglasses on, head low, pretending not to hear the reporter calling her name. But Joan heard everything, and this time, she let it echo. She didn't answer her phone when Layla called again. She didn't open the email from Darren with the subject line, "We should talk." She just stood at her mailbox the next morning, retrieving a plain white envelope with no return address. Inside, a court summons. Not for Joan, for Darren. State of Texas versus Darren Wallace. Charge: witness intimidation, obstruction, and violation of state medical ethics code. Joan stared at the bold print for a long time. Clara walked up behind her. "Is that?" Joan handed her the paper. "It's happening." Clara read it slowly. "He's actually being charged." Joan looked out across the street, where the trees had finally started turning amber. He earned it. And somewhere inside her, the part that had once just wanted to be invited, it went silent. Not gone. Finished. It came in a heavy cream envelope with silver embossed lettering. Joan didn't need to open it to know what it was. She turned it over slowly, thumb brushing the edge of the flap. No return address, just her name written in that familiar, rounded cursive she hadn't seen since before the wedding. Layla's handwriting. She opened it anyway. Inside, printed on glossy cardstock, "Baby shower for Layla and Jason. Hosted by Melanie Bright. Date, time, location. Registry details at the bottom. No note, no apology, just a name placed where Joan's never belonged, under hosted by. She exhaled through her nose, quiet, unsurprised. Behind her, Clara walked in, holding 2 mugs of tea. She caught the card in Joan's hand and rolled her eyes so hard it nearly echoed. "Oh, for God's sake," she muttered, setting the mugs down. She really thought this would go unnoticed. Joan held the invitation between 2 fingers like it might stain. "It's not about noticing. It's about pretending I've forgotten." Clara sat down across from her, pulled her hair into a messy knot. "Want to crash it? We could show up, pass out copies of the new will, maybe toss in a PowerPoint presentation about title transfers." Joan laughed, the sound low and warm. Tempting. Clara leaned in, voice gentler now. "Seriously, though, you okay?" Joan nodded. "I already rewrote the will." She opened the drawer beside her and pulled out a folder, crisp and neatly labeled. "Final, estate, J. Wallace, sealed. Melanie and Darren," she continued, "are now explicitly disinherited. Not just removed, disinherited. No appeals. No ambiguities." Clara raised her mug. "May they never find your name on a check again." And, Joan added, sliding over a second document, "A new college fund has been created." Clara's eyebrows lifted. "For Eliza's kids?" Joan shook her head. "For children of widowed single mothers. Criteria are strict. Applicants need proof of loss, proof of hardship, and a letter explaining how their mothers carried them through it." Clara read the header aloud. "The Ruth Wallace Foundation." Joan smiled, just faintly. "Named after my mother. She used to say, 'Raise kids who feel loved, not owed.' I failed at that with mine, so I'll fund those who still have a chance." Clara looked at her, a mix of pride and something else. Awe, maybe, respect, reverence. "Evan finalized all the title transfers last night," Joan said, more to herself now. "The house, the land, the accounts, everything's legally sealed." Clara leaned back in her chair, the air around them settling into something heavier than silence. So she said softly, "That's it?" Joan nodded. "That's it. No more drafts, no more courtrooms, no more waiting to be remembered." She stood and walked to the window, watching as the wind tossed leaves across the yard. Red, gold, orange, all the things that used to make autumn feel nostalgic, now felt like punctuation marks. Sharp, final, undeniable. Behind her, Clara picked up the invitation again. "Are you going to send something? A gift? A card?" Joan looked over her shoulder, eyes cool but not cruel. "I already gave her a gift." Clara tilted her head. "My name," Joan said. She chose not to use it. She walked over, plucked the invitation from Clara's hands and slid it gently into the trash bin. Not torn, just gone. And then she poured the tea. They sat together, drinking quietly, the sun angling low against the kitchen tile. Outside, a car drove past. Layla's, maybe, maybe not. Joan didn't check, but later, just before dusk, Clara stepped out to bring in the mail. She returned holding a new envelope. This one had no embossing. No shimmer, just plain white paper folded once, with no name on the outside. Joan opened it. Inside was a photograph. Of her. It was from the wedding, cropped from the viral video. She was standing at the edge of the aisle, holding the white rose. On the back, in shaky pen, "I remember, I'm sorry, and trust. J." Joan stared at it. Her fingers hovered over the shredder, then stopped. She tucked the photo in the back of the estate file. Not as forgiveness, not as proof, just as evidence that someone finally had looked back. The number was bigger than she thought it would be. $18,632. All of it drawn from Joan's dormant household account. The one still linked to a card she hadn't used since Darren moved out 5 years ago. Clara read it aloud, jaws slack. That's not champagne and centerpieces. That's fraud, with a flourish. Joan stared at the spreadsheet Evan had sent. Each line item labeled with cold clarity. Venue down payment, band deposit, specialty cake design, rental chairs, sound system, all marked paid with Joan's name listed under billing. The florist had only been the beginning. Evan's voice came through the speakerphone, steady but tense. The transactions weren't authorized by you. The card was expired. They must have updated the info using a linked joint account from years ago. It was never fully removed. That's how Melanie got access. Joan's voice didn't shake. And Darren? Evan didn't answer right away. Then, he was on several of the calls with vendors. His name shows up as a point of contact more than once. Clara folded her arms, furious. So not only did they uninvite you, lie about it, and forge your signature, they used your money to pay for the party they threw you out of. Evan exhaled. I've already filed for restitution, plus damages. We're naming Melanie and Darren as co-defendants. And the banks? Joan asked. Melanie just lost access to 3 lines of joint credit. Her name was flagged after we submitted the fraud report. She'll be receiving formal notice by certified mail. Joan stared at the spreadsheet. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like inventory. Like someone had finally tallied the things taken from her and sent the receipt. And Darren, she asked again. We're naming him as a willful enabler. It won't be criminal, Evans said, but it'll follow him, publicly. Joan nodded once. The call ended. Clara refilled their mugs without asking. They really should have let you eat your cake, she muttered, sitting down. Joan smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. They're learning to swallow their choices now. Clara raised her mug. To indigestion. They clinked gently. Outside, wind rattled the leaves still hanging on. Fall was nearly spent now, branches barer than they'd been just a week before. Joan watched one leaf spiral down the front walkway and land without sound. Clara looked over at her. You feel different, lighter. Joan considered that. I feel clean, not whole, but honest. She picked up the invitation again, the baby shower one, now slightly curled at the edges from being handled too much. Clara saw her glance. You're not going, right? Joan folded the invite and set it aside. No. I've already been shown where I stand. I'm just keeping it, like a receipt. They sat in silence, sipping tea, while the sun dropped inch by inch toward the edge of the sky. Then Joan's phone buzzed. She turned it over. A new text. Unknown number. I've been subpoenaed in the Houston case. I'm ready to talk. I'll do it in court if I have to. He's lied long enough. Nurse A. Jones set the phone down gently. She didn't smile. She just exhaled. They're unraveling, she said. Clara leaned forward, eyes locked on hers. And you? Joan looked back out the window. I'm just getting started. The card arrived a week later, thin enough to slip under the door without a sound. No fancy envelope this time, just pale blue paper folded once and sealed with a cheap sticker shaped like a star. Joan sat at the kitchen table, the morning sun filtering across her hands, and slid a finger beneath the flap. Inside, a single sheet with a watercolor illustration of tiny footprints. A short printed message. Introducing our little miracle. No photo, no explanation. Just a name, printed in cursive at the bottom. Eleanor. No middle name, no last name. Joan stared at the baby's name for a long moment. Her thumb hovered over the edge of the paper. She could almost hear her own mother's voice, Ruth Wallace, who'd said once, "A name is a promise, not a possession." She folded the card carefully and set it aside. No tears, no trembling, just a quiet click of finality inside her chest. Across from her, Clara set down a stack of papers tied with a blue ribbon. "Everything's signed," she said softly. "Final, sealed, irreversible." Joan reached for it. Inside were the last documents of her estate. Title transfers, disinheritance clauses, trust agreements, every page initialed, every box checked. "The Ruth Wallace Foundation," Clara asked. "Ready for launch," Joan said. She opened a leather binder labeled Scholarship Fund, widowed single mothers, and slipped out a pile of applications. Handwritten letters in neat cursive and clumsy print. Stories of women holding down 2 jobs, studying at night, feeding their kids with one hand, and doing homework with the other. She read the first paragraph of one and felt her chest tighten, not with regret, but with recognition. She signed the first scholarship check, her name looping steady and unshakable at the bottom. "I wanted my legacy to be a family," she murmured. "Now it's a lifeline." Clara's eyes flicked toward the baby card sitting off to the side. "That's still a kind of family," she said gently. Joan didn't look at it. "No, that's a bloodline." She pulled another binder from the shelf, a thick, worn leather guest book she'd kept since her 40th birthday. Originally meant for dinner parties, family reunions, Thanksgiving lists. Most of the pages were filled with names in looping ink and pencil smudges. She flipped to a blank page near the back, wrote across the top in her firm hand. "Who's out then?" Without hesitation, she listed. Melanie Bright, Darren Wallace. A line for Layla's name, left blank. Clara raised an eyebrow. "Leaving it MD?" "For now," Joan said. Clara didn't ask why. Evan's voice came from the speakerphone, bright but measured. "You've reclaimed everything," he said. "Titles transferred, accounts secured, foundation funded, every loose thread tied." Joan signed another scholarship check. "Good." "You've also set a precedent," Evan added. "You've turned a humiliation into a model. I've had 3 calls from other clients this week who saw your story in the paper." Joan looked up. "Let them call. Let them learn." Clara reached across the table and touched her wrist. "You're done, Joan. You don't have to keep proving anything." Joan met her eyes. "This isn't proof. It's protection." She slid the baby card under the binder, not tearing it, not discarding it, just keeping it with the paperwork, evidence of what could have been and what wasn't. Outside, the wind picked up again, scattering the last of the autumn leaves across the yard. Then Joan's phone buzzed, a single vibration that didn't stop. She picked it up. A voicemail transcript appeared. "Unknown number. I know what Darren did with the settlement money. Meet me tonight." Joan set the phone down slowly, the corners of her mouth tightening. "Who?" Clara asked, reading her face. Joan looked at the scholarship forms, then at the guest book, then at the window where the trees stood bare and unashamed. "I don't know yet," she said, "but they're not done, and neither am I." The ballroom lights dimmed as Joan approached the podium, heels clicking softly against the wooden stage. The room stretched wide in front of her, rows of white-haired heads, quiet faces, wrinkled hands folded in laps, some with oxygen tanks, some with walkers, all with stories. Behind her, a banner read, "Elder Justice Council Annual Summit." voices that matter. The chairwoman had introduced her as Joan Wallace, advocate, philanthropist, survivor. Joan hadn't corrected her. Not because it wasn't true, but because survival didn't mean what it used to. She took a breath. Humiliation isn't harmless, she said, voice steady into the mic. It's not a joke. It doesn't fade with time. It leaves marks that silence only deepens. The room stilled. I was asked to speak about financial abuse against the elderly. But I'm not here to talk about fraud through stolen checkbooks or investment schemes. I'm here to talk about the slow theft of dignity, the kind that happens at dinner tables, in group chats, at weddings. A murmur rippled. She let it settle. I raised 2 children. I paid for their school lunches, their braces, their heartbreaks. I paid for a wedding I wasn't invited to. I paid for the cake, and was escorted out before a single slice was served. Someone gasped. I don't tell you this to shame them. I tell you this because I once believed loyalty meant invisibility. That if I stayed quiet long enough, someone would remember me. They didn't, she paused. But I did. I remembered myself. From the front row, a woman pressed a tissue to her cheek. Joan continued, her tone clear and deliberate. I created a scholarship fund in my mother's name for single widowed mothers who raise children without applause. I rewrote my will. I named my truth in public court. And still, what hurts most isn't the betrayal. It's the decades I spent waiting for someone to see me before they needed me. She looked out at the sea of faces, some crying, some nodding, all listening. To those of you whose names have been erased but whose wallets remain on speed dial, you are not crazy. You are not dramatic, and you are not alone. The applause started in the back, then rolled forward like a tide. Clara stood just off stage, misty-eyed, arms crossed tightly over her chest, as if to keep the emotion in. After the panel ended, seniors lined up beside the podium. Some offered thank yous, others pressed handwritten notes into her palm. But one woman stepped forward with tears in her eyes and both hands trembling. Thank you, she whispered. My son treats me like a bill, like a utility. I thought I was the only one. Joan took both her hands gently. You're not. Later that afternoon, the chairwoman of the Elder Justice Council presented her with a plaque engraved in gold. Joan Wallace, for speaking when others couldn't. She accepted it with a nod. No speech, just stillness, the kind that meant more than words. Backstage, as the crowd dispersed and the light shifted toward early evening, Clara caught up with her, still sniffling. You were incredible, she said, wiping under her eyes. You didn't just stand on that stage. You stood up for all of us. Joan smiled. Took me 68 years. Clara grinned. You aged well into your rage. They laughed, shoulders finally softening. Just as they reached the exit doors, Joan's phone buzzed. A message from Layla. She opened it, thumb tight against the screen. I understand now. I'm sorry. Not for the wedding. For not seeing you. For not asking why you stood alone. Joan stared at the words. They weren't long, but they weren't late either. She didn't respond. Not yet. Instead, she tucked the phone into her coat pocket and stepped into the parking lot, where the wind had picked up again, rustling paper programs and curling leaves into whirlpools by the curb. Behind her, Clara's footsteps were steady. Beside her, her name was finally her own. The courtyard sparkled under late morning sun, an October kind of brightness that warmed without sweating, that felt earned after too much wind. 2 long tables stretched across the patio at Joan's retirement community, draped in soft linen, dotted with vases of yellow tulips, and glass pitchers filled with elderflower spritzers, the kind of brunch that whispered belonging instead of screaming event. Joan moved between chairs, greeting each guest with the grace of someone who no longer feared being overlooked. Her white blouse was pressed, sleeves rolled just past the wrist. The silver in her hair caught the sun like it was on purpose. Clara had organized the logistics, food from a local cafe, drinks from the club's kitchen, name tags printed in neat script. But the guest list? That had been Jones. Each person here had one thing in common. They had shown up, not with banners or bouquets, but with presence, with eyes that didn't flinch, with time. There was Mrs. Bellamy from Unit 2C, who'd brought soup the night Jones' summons for Darren arrived. Marlene, a retired librarian, who'd slipped her a note during last week's book club that simply read, "You're not the only mother they erased." And Iris, who'd posted Jones' scholarship fund to her church bulletin without being asked. Clara clinked her spoon against a wine glass once the quiche plates were cleared. "I'd like to propose a toast," she said, rising slowly, holding her glass aloft. Every face turned toward Joan. "To the one who taught us that silence isn't noble, that family isn't inherited, that dignity doesn't expire." She paused, her voice catching, just barely. "To the woman who redefined what family means, not with blood, but with backbone." Applause broke like a wave. Joan's eyes shone, but no tears fell. She smiled, not wide, but real. "I almost canceled this," she said, as the laughter settled. "I thought maybe it was self-indulgent. But then I remembered. They already took the wedding. This one's mine." The crowd chuckled, and someone near the back raised a mimosa like a peace flag. There were no whispers here, no pitying glances. Just sunlight, stories, and the clatter of forks against ceramic. As the last slice of plum tart was passed around, Clara appeared at Joan's side with a small square package wrapped in deep navy tissue paper. "No card," she said. "But it's from all of us." Joan peeled back the layers slowly. Inside was a shadow box. Framed in the center, pressed flat and preserved behind glass, was a single white rose, its edges slightly yellowed, but its shape intact. The stem wrapped in a thin gold thread. Underneath, typed on a soft card, the flower that started it all. "You carried it with grace. We carried you back." Joan ran a finger gently along the edge of the glass. For a moment, no one said anything. Then Joan stood. She didn't say thank you. She didn't make a speech. She simply walked toward the building's front lobby, the shadow box pressed to her chest. Clara followed. Inside, past the reception desk and memory board, Joan paused at the main hallway, the one where every resident was allowed to hang one framed item outside their door. Most had family portraits, military medals, wedding photos. Joan looked at the blank space outside her unit. She hung the shadow box there, dead center, not as a warning, as proof of what they tried to erase and what refused to be forgotten. Clara exhaled beside her. "Looks like it always belonged there." Joan's smile was soft. It did. Just then, the automatic door opened with a quiet hiss. A young woman stepped through, mid-30s, nervous, holding a baby on her hip. Joan turned slowly. The woman looked around, spotted her, and cleared her throat. "Are you Joan Wallace?" Joan stepped forward. "Yes." The woman held out an envelope, her hand shaking slightly. "I'm supposed to give this to you. From someone in Houston." Joan took it. It was thick and sealed. Joan walked the vineyard path behind her retirement home, the late sun slipping gold over rows of sleeping vines. It was quiet here, not lonely, just still. Her cane tapped softly against the gravel, more rhythm than support now. Clara strolled beside her, arms linked. The warmth between them was wordless. To their right, lanterns glowed on shepherd's hooks, lighting the way toward the event lawn. Long tables were already being set, linens floating, wine chilled. It was the first annual Harvest Community Dinner, hosted in Joan's name, but no one called it that aloud. They just called it Joan's Night. Kids played tag between the tree rows. Somewhere, someone tested the sound system. A Frank Sinatra tune floated on the air like something remembered rather than played. Back inside, on the table near Joan's front door, sat a neatly stacked box of books. Her books. The guest book had become a memoir. The Woman They Erased, by Joan Wallace. Bound in deep navy, embossed in gold foil. The cover was stark. Her name, alone. No photo, No dedication, just story. Truth sharpened and unsweetened. She donated copies to every local library, every senior center within 50 miles. Not to sell, not to tour, just to give. Because silence had once been her inheritance, and she'd decided it would end with her. Joan paused at a bend in the vineyard path and looked back. The courtyard twinkled now. People were arriving, hugs, laughter, real joy, not the curated kind. Families, couples, friends. Not all hers, but none of them not hers. I never thought it'd feel like this, Clara murmured, watching the crowd grow. Like what? Joan asked. Like you rebuilt something they never even knew they broke. Joan smiled. They'll know now. They stood in silence for a beat. The moment stretched between them like something sacred. You still hurt? Clara asked softly. Joan let out a long breath. No, healed and remembered. Clara squeezed her hand, and together they walked toward the noise and the light. The party had already begun by the time they reached the tables. Someone offered Joan a glass of red wine. She took it without ceremony. Toasts started rising before dessert was even served. To courage, to community, to beginning again. When the first notes of music played, old swing, nothing trendy, people began to dance. Not perfectly, not young, but freely. And for the first time in a long time, Joan laughed. Not a polite chuckle, a real one. Head tilted back, eyes crinkling. The kind of laugh that lives deeper than memory and louder than grief. The vineyard echoed with it. Later, when the sun had dipped low and the plates were cleared, Joan returned to her porch with Clara and one last glass of wine. The shadow box still hung outside her door, the white rose softly lit under a porch light. A silent, beautiful middle finger to everything that tried to reduce her to that woman. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, a speech, the one she'd written and never delivered. She didn't read it aloud. She just unfolded it once, flattened it against her lap, and added a line to the bottom in her own hand. At my granddaughter's wedding, my daughter-in-law pointed at me and told security, "Get that woman out of here." My own son sat in silence. She paused, then finished the sentence. But now, so does my legacy. Joan folded the page again. This time, she didn't put it away. She left it there on the porch table for anyone to read.